Welcome to the Purpose and Profit Club podcast for nonprofit leaders, mission-driven creatives, and social entrepreneurs. Get ready to stop dreaming and start doing. Here, ideas become action. We prioritize purpose and profit. You ready? Let's go. Welcome to the podcast, Stephanie. Now, I put in a chat GPT. I let it tell me how to phonetically pronounce your name, and so we're going to try it. You ready?
Yes.
Skryzowski? How'd I do? Not good.
No. Okay. If you were like in Poland, that's how you would say it. So it's just Skryzowski. But I think in Poland, they would say like Skryzowski. So, I mean, you've
close.
got the like authentic pronunciation. Yay, ChatGPT.
Oh my goodness. With 100 Degrees Consulting. So listen, my maiden name is spelled, I'm not going to say it. It's spelled Tzavaras. And so as just a baseline to ChatGPT, I said, say my maiden name. And it got it pretty good. I was like, all right. So that was my baseline. And Savaras is how to say it.
That's what I was going to say, Savaras. That doesn't seem that tricky.
Oh my gosh. Oh, was it tricky? People would listen affectionately. I was like, just Tarzan would come out of people. They're like, TZ, Tarzan. We don't know. All right. Well, we're going to dig in. So you are the founder of 100 Degrees Consulting. Tell us about your work and what you do. And I'm really thrilled for this conversation because this is outside my zone, but a zone I am super passionate about for the nonprofit and social impact world.
Yes. So 100 Degrees Consulting provides CFO, that's Chief Financial Officer, and bookkeeping services to nonprofits. So we are basically like an outsourced finance team for nonprofit organizations. That's this one sentence description of what we do.
Yeah. And so you have a love for numbers in a way that is outside of my zone. And I would imagine a lot of small to mid-sized shops come to you and they're heavy on the love for maybe the program side, the impact side, the storytelling side, the fundraising side, and not so much the finance side. Is that fair to say?
100%. We are like those people that you reluctantly hire because you have to. And we do all the work that you got to check the box, you got to have a budget, you got to do your 990, but like I shouldn't say nobody, but most people are not particularly excited from a business model perspective. It's great because everybody needs us. We are, we're sort of filling that compliance need, but yeah, we're not exactly the people that you're excited to hire.
Okay, but one of the reasons why you and I got along so well is because your approach to this world is very forward thinking. And that's what I want to talk about today. Because I do think that there is an old school way to think about a nonprofit's finances and maybe a newer school way to think about it. So tell me about your way. How do you think about the finances? How do you think about the health of an organization? What are some standards you like to see? What are some red flags?
Yeah. So when we're thinking about the financial health of an organization, I mean, I'm looking at revenue diversity. Are we getting our revenue from a bunch of different sources? Do we have, 3 to 6 months of cash in the bank? And do we have a forward thinking forecast where we are looking 12 to 24 to maybe even 60 months, 5 years into the future from a financial perspective? Because I see a lot of organizations who have these beautiful strategic plans that they spend a lot of money to create. And what is missing is the financial resource plan to go along with it. And so then, we get into the next year and we're like, okay, let's achieve, strategic plan objective number 2. And we're like, oh, wait, we have no budget for that. We didn't really think about the financial side. And so I think that forecasting piece is another really, really important thing that I see in financially healthy nonprofits. And the last thing I'll say that's a little less tactical, I just talked about revenue diversity and cash and forecasting, very technical things, but I also think an abundance mindset in the leadership of the organization is so important, because if we are sort of operating out of that scarcity mindset where it's okay, there's a fixed pot and we have to squeeze as much as possible out of this fixed pot of money, and we're going to scrape by on pennies and not pay our people well, and have a duct taped laptop, which I did have when I was working in a nonprofit, that is not the way to grow and expand into have the impact that you want to have. So I think maybe that's even the foundational piece, is that we've got this like expanded abundance mindset in our leadership as well.
So when you say abundance mindset, I think of somebody recently who was saying that they're competing for dollars. So it's the opposite of thinking about competing for dollars. Yeah. Like, let's actually just for a minute, and then we'll come back to more tactical of like, what does an abundance mindset look like, sound like, versus what you sometimes hear or see?
Yeah. So there really is unlimited resources, right? There's not one pot. If you think about it, like money is just, I don't explain it super well, but like money is an unlimited resource. There are an unlimited number of dollars in this world. There's not a fixed pot, and there was always more where that came from. And so maybe you're thinking like, okay, I'm just going to, I'm going to apply to all the grants that, are even tangentially related to my organization. And then maybe you don't get any of them. And you're like, oh, well, there's like, that's it. That was it. That was all that I have to apply for. Exactly. Like, no, absolutely not. There's always more money. And so just kind of that's one, I don't know, that's one way to think about abundance. Yeah.
I love it. It's reminding me. So I just hosted this workshop, and if you look at like the state of philanthropy right now, there's a report you could grab that shows that individual giving is down, blah, blah, blah. And also GoFundMe they almost double every year. So I was pulling their impact reports, which they don't write the same every year. So it's hard to like totally, but I can tell you their like top line revenue keeps going up and up and up. And I'm like, how can that be? If there was just one pot of donors who had a finite amount for them to say, this is how much I'm giving to GoFundMe, then their revenue would be flat year over year, right? And so it's like, not only are they growing in revenue, they're growing in donors. And I said that, and somebody on the workshop said, how do I get a GoFundMe? And I was like, you're missing the point. This is not about getting a GoFundMe account. No. Whatever fundraising tool you have is fine. It's about realizing that, there's plenty out there and tapping into it. That's the work, and believing that it's out there right first, and then tapping into it.
And look at like Mackenzie Scott, who came onto the scene a few years ago and just started giving away these massive transformational gifts, like one-time unrestricted money in millions and millions of dollars per organization. And like, that wasn't really a thing in the mainstream, like 5 years ago. And now that's becoming more normal. Like 5 years ago, we wouldn't have dreamed that was like a thing, but
possible.
Right. Exactly. So it really is like, it is unlimited, and you have to believe it. Of course, it's more than just belief, right? We can't just wish for something and then $5 million from somebody magically appears in our bank account. But it's like, how can we get creative and think outside of these sort of lanes that we've stayed in really consistently, and start to get creative? Or maybe it means asking for more money from a donor. You normally ask for 50,000. Let's ask for 100,000 this year, and let's see what they say, right? Like, it's that sort of expansive thinking that pulls us outside of these boxes that we have kept ourselves in for a long time.
I just feel like you don't hear that from a lot of CFOs. So I love that. Thank you for sharing that piece with us, Stephanie. But that's such an important piece is when you have somebody who's looking at the numbers to actually say to you, you know what, Christina, here's what's possible over here. Like, to believe in you, to hold that for you, I think is really important. I want to go back to revenue diversity that you mentioned, which is, when I think of revenue diversity, I think a little bit almost of strategy diversity that people come to me with, and they're throwing spaghetti at the wall, which means they're like, we applied for these grants. We are also doing online fundraising. We have an event strategy. So we're also doing this. We're also doing that. I know that's not what you mean. What is a nice makeup or mix of revenue diversity for healthy org?
Yeah. So that's a great question and a great point, right? Where this is not a throw the spaghetti at the wall and get like little bits of money from a million different places. No, we want to really hone in on the handful of areas where we can be experts and be really strong in raising money. But what I mean is that we don't want all of our eggs in one basket when it comes to actual money in the door. So I worked with an organization who had a government grant that was from the federal government that was funding about, 70, 75% of their annual budget. That's a lot, right? So like if that government grant goes away, they're left with only 25% of their budget and need to like come up with 75% from somewhere else. And that's what happened. This federal government said, listen, we do not want to make up 3/4 of your annual budget. You need to diversify your revenue so we are a smaller percentage of the total. And so the federal agency like backed off their grant little by little over the course of like 3 years, and then they don't have the grant anymore. And so they had to do this like real fast under pressure. We don't want that situation. So what I mean is like thinking about maybe the 3 or 4 areas in which you're really strong and focusing on that, so that you have a spread of revenue across different sources. Now, maybe if you're really strong in individual fundraising, great. Well, let's diversify across individuals, right? We don't want like 3 individuals funding the whole organization. Then you probably wouldn't pass the public support test anyway. But thinking about different sources of revenue, but that does not mean, like you said, like throwing spaghetti at the wall and having 100 different sources of revenue, because we're not going to do very well at that either.
At certain revenue levels, maybe for small to mid-sized shops, do you see like the most opportunity for revenue sources that they're when you look at when a nonprofit comes to you and sort of assessing their financials and doing some discovery and they're at 750,000 or something like that, are you like, oh, that's interesting, I see some opportunity for them to develop a revenue stream here or to go deeper with this revenue stream versus like some low-hanging fruit? I suppose that's what I'm trying to say. That's a little bit more across the board.
Yeah. I mean, so when I come in, I'm always looking at like the last 5 years of financial statements. So I'm looking at the income statement over the last 5 years, and likely on your income statement on the revenue section on the top, you've got it broken down. Your revenue is broken down by source. And so I can see over the last 5 years what each has done. And so if we see, maybe under individuals, it's like gone up 15, 20% year over year. That's great. That's a good sign. Well, maybe that's a sign that we can actually crank that up a little bit more, and there's some opportunity there. Grants, on the other hand, maybe that's like, up and down because you get a big multi-year grant and we recognize all the revenue, and then the next year, not so much. But maybe there's some opportunity in there to look at renewals. Okay, well, this funder funded us before, like it's been a couple gap years, but maybe we can go back to them again. And so I'm always looking at history and seeing what the trajectory has looked like. I think another opportunity area that I'm seeing some organizations is around like fee for service or like earned revenue. And so there may be opportunities within the organization to like ramp that up. I have some clients that are like making things like sort of artisan craft type things as part of their programs. That's a revenue stream. I've seen some organizations do like consulting, like IP, intellectual property, that they have sort of created this framework that they're now able to license out to other organizations and make revenue on that. So, so that's kind of how I look at it. I definitely like to look at.
Would a membership be also in that category of fee for service, like some sort of, Yeah. Okay, cool. I'm curious on monthly giving. Do you have any opinions, thoughts on recurring giving programs? And do you like to see them? What are your thoughts?
Well, yes and no. I mean, yes, because for some donors, it's going to make it easier for them to give more and more consistently. And so it also provides a recurring revenue stream for the organization. So you know that, okay, every single month we've got roughly $10,000 that's coming in from monthly giving. Great. I think in other areas, if we're not doing it strategically and really being mindful of who we have in our monthly giving program, we may be missing out on an opportunity to go bigger with them and to make a bigger ask. Whereas like we just settle into like, okay, they're giving us $100 a month, $1,200 a year. Great. But if we cultivated the relationship a little bit better, maybe they would have given us 5,000. Like they're giving us 1,200. Why not 5,000? So I feel like there may be some missed opportunity there, especially for organizations who are just kind of treating their monthly giving program as like a set it and forget it kind of thing. Because for revenue, that is how it feels. It's like, great, we've hooked them into our monthly giving. Now we don't have to think about them again. But I think there could be some missed opportunity there. I'm curious to what you think as like on the fundraising side.
I feel like there has been a lot of talk about monthly giving lately?
Yes.
Like it's a trend in the same way that like, I don't know, whatever was a trend a few years ago. So it's a trend. So a lot of organizations are interested. They're coming to me. They want to start one. They already have one, but no one's in it. So they want to actually have a successful one. And I'm all in. I like it. It makes sense. With the like little asterisk, right? That like, what does the rest of your revenue stream look like? So for example, I would always rather you go make sure that we've cultivated some major donors upstream before you spend a lot of time cultivating $25 donors per month, which I think seems obvious, but is a common mistake that I see with smaller shops, because it may feel a little bit more comfortable to just send a social post out, an email out soliciting monthly donors to everyone, then go to meet face to face and ask for a $10,000 gift. So I see some of that resistance there. And then the other piece with monthly giving is we forget, like we're like, here's the upside. We get this recurring monthly income, which allows us to do X, Y, and Z. But we forget about like, what is their donor experience? Like what's in it for them? Why should they stay? Many organizations haven't fleshed that out. In my coaching program, we're doing a monthly giving so that they can actually figure that out if they're interested in like cultivating that. So I like it, but it's like, I like it if you're ready. I like it if there's that asterisk, that kind of piece on monthly giving, if that makes sense.
Yeah. And I also think like, I know in my business as a business owner, I've really learned that like playing the long game always yields much bigger and better results. And so as you were talking about like setting up this monthly giving program versus going out and having, sitting down with a major donor, like that might be a longer time horizon, but that relationship is going to be so much deeper and the reward is going to be so much greater, I think. And so I think you're right to have that, to have that balance for sure.
You listed like in how you talked about monthly giving was an interesting kind of piece, which is, I think a lot of times people do forget that their major donors are monthly givers, and they're sort of mixing the fact that just because somebody gives once a month recurring, it comes straight out of my checking account, doesn't mean that I don't also want to give that $5,000 gift. But people forget to ask or forget to cultivate those people, that there is some overlap. Not all. Some people just want to spread their gift over, that's easy. But that's another piece. And that's like a little bit more of an advanced maybe strategy, but that, there are likely major donors that are just giving us fractionally each year because you haven't asked them, because you haven't cultivated.
Yeah, exactly. And I feel like for smaller, to medium shops, as you've been talking about, you probably don't have like that many people at your monthly giving program that you don't know who they are, and that you can't like go that extra bit to build a bit of a relationship.
Find out.
Yeah.
Totally. Yeah. Okay. Good point. All right. I want to talk about expenses. I was like, what do I want to talk about? Expenses. That's the word of like how nonprofits spend money. So when I was on your podcast, we got into a big conversation about overhead and how my thesis, just to bring everybody up to speed, is that I don't like it when nonprofits say, good news, we spent, 3% of our total budget on overhead, which I translate to good news, we pay our staff at poverty level, they're barely making ends meet, and the churn in our development and programs position is bananas. Aren't you proud of us? So like that's is that I don't think it should be a badge of honor. But I do think with that, I'd love to hear your perspective, and also like, okay, people saying, okay, Christina, I hear you, but what is a safe amount to spend on overhead? Like, what does a healthy organization that is more forward thinking look like?
Well, yes, I 100% agree with you. And I have been part of organizations that have touted their very low overhead. Meanwhile, I've got my duct taped laptop and I'm like toiling away over things that like we could have easily hired somebody to do for like $1,000, and I'm spending like months on these things. So definitely been there and have experienced that firsthand. And it's just so short-sighted, right? Like we're not investing in the right things to help us grow and to help our impact like exponentially expand. It's just very short-sighted. So yeah, I'm with you. And in terms of a sort of healthy amount, I mean, There's a lot of different opinions on this. I think the Better Business Bureau has an opinion, and Charity Navigator has an opinion, and your auditor probably has an opinion. Our auditors that I've worked with, with many different organizations, like that, sort of 15%. And if it starts creeping up to 20 or beyond that, they're going to say, okay, what are we allocating our expenses properly is the first question that they ask. Like, why does it seem like, because they know that your organization is doing really good work and I know you're managing your money well. So like, have you not allocated something to programs that should be, is usually the first question they're asking. But anyway, usually around 15% is not going to raise any eyebrows. It's not going to raise any red flags. And, again, assuming that you're allocating your expenses accurately. When I say that, for those of you that don't know, basically, there are expenses like rent, for example, that's not solely an administrative or an overhead expense. That type of expense should be partially attributed to programs and probably a little bit to fundraising and probably some to admin as well. And so, if anybody listening is not doing that, you probably have a pretty high overhead rate that's not entirely accurate. So anyway, that's what I'm talking about when I mean allocating. But yeah, so I would say, long answer to your question, around 15% is probably not going to raise any red flags, but still gives you a healthy amount to work with.
Yeah. I saw this Facebook post recently in one of those nonprofit Facebook groups, and the organization was lamenting that I guess Grammarly used to have a free, like you could get Grammarly's Pro account for free for nonprofits. And now now nonprofits have to pay for it too. And they were lamenting about that, but they were also in the post basically saying, well, now I can't use Grammarly. Like now I don't have Grammarly. And I was like, and the thread of comments that were like, this is awful. Us too. We're in it too. And I was like, is this real? Am I hallucinating? Like Grammarly, I don't know how much it is a year, but it's got to be $100 or less a year. Like it's cheap. That like talk about short-sighted, but that is a very extreme example of organizations sometimes being reluctant to spend money because they think they need to keep the overhead low, right? And then you talked about, you could have hired a consultant to do something when you were working in a house for $1,000 that took you way longer in the amount of time. So that's where I see it's like, buy the Grammarly, get the Canva Pro account, like get the thing, like $100, $300. Software is how you create time. But a lot of times, and this may be, and I wrote down in my notes, board. This may be part of the relationship and the culture of the board of like overhead has to be low. So maybe the question I have for you next is, how does the board fit into the mix of this conversation?
Mm-hmm. Oh my gosh. I, first of all, love it. I remember talking to an executive director about Calendly, like the software, the calendar booking. I mean, yes, as a podcast host and a business owner, I know we've used this for years, and they were like, it's $15 a month. And I'm like, okay, you will literally save like 6 hours of time. Like, we don't even have to do the math. Like that's a no brainer, but they were hesitant about like $15, $20 a month. So I hear you. The board. So yeah, I mean, a lot of times we do have to get, there's two different types of boards, and I'm sure, well, there's lots of different types, but there's the type of board that's like, okay, executive director, whatever you say, like you just tell us, we're going to, put our stamp and signature on everything. Like we trust you, we're good. That's like that's helpful as an executive director because you can really, share with them your strategy for impact and growth and investment and those kinds of things. And then there's a board that's like super micromanaging, and they're in your business and they are asking, why did the overhead rate go from 6.5% to 7% last year? Like that's hard. And I've dealt with those kind of boards as well. One thing that I've seen with those kind of boards is bringing in a third party that has been very, very helpful. Sometimes we are the third party. Sometimes it's like an executive director brings on my company as their external finance team, and we're coming in and presenting the financials and showing them, look at this, look at that, look at this metric. And that external person can be really helpful. In other cases, I've also seen bringing the auditor in. And so typically, most of the auditors that we work with like to come to a board meeting once a year, present the results of the audit. And this one audit firm that we work with, they actually have this whole sheet of like metrics and benchmarks that they like to share to say, hey, this is how your organization is stacking up against our like thousands of other clients. And so one of the metrics in there is looking at the overhead rate. And so that's when they're sharing, yeah, we're seeing, average is 15 to 20%, and you all are at, 13%. So that's a really good number to be at. And they do flag it if it looks too low. And so I think that is a really good strategy of bringing in someone outside of the organization to just talk to the board in a different way. And I've seen that be really helpful.
I feel like there are some boards where it's either we've always done it this way, or the group on the board doesn't have a lot of training on just how to board, right? How to be a board member. And so it's like no one's totally driving the ship. Like I've had EDs say, let me get back to you on a $200 spend, and it's like, that is a terrible use of everyone's time and a terrible use of donor dollars, if you want to think about it, right? Because now the ED is going back and forth on a $200 spend, which if they're leading the organization, I hope that we trust them to spend $200 in the right way. So it's like, and I see that kind of mix. Sometimes it is kind of old fashioned thinking, but not always. Sometimes it's just the board is like, I guess we're supposed to approve $200 spends every week. So I love the idea of having a third party, a like trusted third party come in and go, here's the range of normal. Here's where we like to see it. Here's some opportunity, and giving them more language to board better. I don't know.
Yeah. I think also putting parameters in place and, depending on how the board is, this might be a difficult conversation or this might be a huge relief to them, but saying like, okay, the executive director has the ability to approve expenses up to X amount or X percentage of the budget. And only when it exceeds that must they get approval from the board chair or whatever. Like putting these guidelines in place, I think are really helpful for everyone. Also, your auditor likes those because they're nice internal controls where somebody, the executive director needs approval. And the other thing that I've seen as well is, this is kind of the same, kind of different, but the auditors really like to see the board looking at the executive director's expenses. So whether they are expenses incurred on the organization's credit card that the executive director holds or expenses that were reimbursed to the executive director, like just having somebody on the board or the finance committee looking at those quarterly is nice as well. And that provides the board a sense of like sort of a sense of control and review but also just giving the executive director the power that they need to spend what they need to spend when they need to spend it.
Yeah, totally. I love all of those kind of levers. I'm curious, what do you feel like is something that the nonprofit world is getting wrong right now or is an opportunity to improve upon? Like, what is something, another way to say it would be like, I wish blank. Like, what is a wish you have?
I wish that there's two things I'm thinking of. I wish that I was seeing more big picture, long-term thinking and strategy. I'm feeling like a lot of organizations I see are thinking about their work and their impact and the transformation of whatever they're doing in the world in this 12-month block, right? We budget at the beginning of the year and we're looking at, our sort of vision stops at the end of the year. But I'm thinking of this one organization in particular that I work with who they have an incredibly healthy cash reserve, and they are continuing to get 6- and 7-figure multi-year grants again and again and again. So their funders are not saying like, oh, you guys have plenty of money. You have plenty of grants. We don't need to help you. They're like, no, we're in. We want to like expand this even further. And one of the reasons why this organization is continuing to get funding, even though, again, they have a really healthy revenue stream, they have a really healthy cash reserve, is because the CEOs are able to sort of articulate this big vision, like a 5-year, 10-year, $50 million vision. Their budget's like 10 million or 12 million, but they're like, yeah, this is actually a $50 million problem. And so sure, maybe we have 10 million to get through this year, but like, can you help us get to the 50 million? And so they're able to bring people into this huge vision that's so far beyond just like this little 12 months of this year, that they just continue to grow and expand. And I would love to see this visionary thinking more in the nonprofit sector instead of just like, we have our budget for this year, we're trying to meet our budget for this year. Like, let's think bigger. Let's like, if we can articulate this vision in a much more compelling way, I think people are going to be much more excited to come along for the ride with us.
Yeah, I think that that's sort of that zooming out macro that can be very advantageous for painting the vision of what's possible to your donors, to your funders, that is missed sometimes when we're going micro and we're like, we have to plug this gap today. Today we need to fund this one thing right here. Yeah. I love that.
Yeah.
Okay. So as we're kind of talking about your work and where you're talking about a $10 million organization, where's your sweet spot of organizations that work with you? How big do they need to be? How small do they need to be to hire a fractional CFO and work with you?
Yeah. So the average is about $2 million in revenue. But we do have organizations that are less than $1 million. And then we've got organizations that are 15 million, I would say is like our biggest. Usually after 15 million, they probably have both the need and the resources to hire a full-time CFO in-house. But until then, sometimes there's not the need for a full-time CFO. They need the work, but not 40 hours a week necessarily, depending on the structure of the organization. And then on the opposite end, under $1 million, you definitely need bookkeeping. But the CFO need is much less. Maybe you need some help with budgeting and cash flow management and maybe some grant financial reporting and things like that, but it's a bit less. And so once you're starting to get over $1 million and into the multi-millions is when we're really going to be most valuable and you're really going to get like the bang for your buck, basically.
Love it. Love it. Love it. Yeah. I'm curious, what do you consider a small shop organization in funding? It's like, what do you consider a major gift is totally subjective.
I know. I'm under $1 million is what I personally consider a small shop.
Yeah.
What do you consider a small shop?
So I usually define them. If I'm even using the term small shop, I would just be like, if you're under $500,000, I'd probably say. And if you're in kind of more of a growth mode, 500 to $1 million, then $1 million, and then I go 1 to 3 in my head. And then 3 and beyond. Yeah. Something like that. So I usually will anchor it in if I'm like saying it to somebody so that they can go, oh, right, that's me or that's not me.
Yeah.
Like some people, a major gift is at least over 5,000, if not 10. And some organizations, it's anything over $1,000. And like in that sense, there's no right or wrong. It's you get to define it and then you'll cultivate those donors. Yeah. So
true. Yeah. I mean, I'm thinking about one organization I worked with, and for them, a major gift was like 30,000.
Yeah. How about that? There you go.
Yeah. Like 1,000. That's just like a regular donor. That's not a major gift.
That's a regular donor.
It's not a major gift. Yeah.
And can we loop back to the abundance piece and the mindset piece, which is the organization who defines a major donor as $1,000 right now, because everybody starts somewhere, feels impossible that they would get a $30,000 gift today. I know because I've worked with so many organizations like that. It's like, they'd be like, Christina, who's going to give us $30,000? And like, literally you start walking by crawling, like you start somewhere and just holding the vision that is possible for your organization and continuing to go is what gets you to that $30,000 gift. But I do think that there's a mentality that like, that's not possible. Or maybe the other objection I would hear from my smaller shop folks would be a $30,000 donor only gives to organizations not like ours. They only give to the big blah, blah, blahs, right? What would you say to that?
That is a limiting belief, man. That was the first thing that came to my head. Like, says who? Says who? Did all of those people, all of the people in the world that give $1,000 gifts or that give $30,000 gifts, have they all told you that they would never give? No, of course not. That is a limiting belief. That is a story that you are telling yourself. That's what I would say.
Yeah. Yeah. Oh, good. Yes. Anything else you want to make sure that we touch on before we wrap up?
Oh man. No, I'm loving that we're having this conversation, and that we absolutely share the same beliefs and strategy on numbers and the importance of managing your numbers. And I would say, for the executive directors, nonprofit CEOs listening, I get a lot of like, oh, but it's hard. I don't like math. Like, I don't understand my finances. Yes. And like, it's actually not that difficult. It doesn't have to be stressful or hard. And really, there's only a handful of numbers that you really need to be looking at every single month. So if we need to like start real small and just say, okay, what are the key numbers we need to be looking at? Let's look at revenue compared to last month and look at the variances, expenses compared to last month. Let's look at how much money we have in the bank, how much cash we have in the bank, and look at the trends of those, right? Look at over the last 6 months. Is revenue going up or is revenue going down? Expenses up or expenses down? And that's a really easy place to start. There's, of course, we can go like much deeper and talk about a lot more different financial metrics, but I think that just starting to really actually look at your income statement that you get from your finance person, not just like glance at it, eyes glaze over, toss it aside. Actually starting to look at your numbers is going to tell you a lot, and it really doesn't have to be hard. And so I just want to share that encouragement, because I get lots of people saying like, I don't like math. I'm bad with numbers. Like, no, you don't have to be. It does not have to be hard.
I think that's a great point. I remember years and years ago when my CPA was like, Christina, I don't know what you're using, but you got to move to QuickBooks if we're going to work together. And just having a dashboard, having him helping to distill the information actually does, if as somebody who doesn't love some of the stuff that you just talked about, I like it, but I don't love it. I don't nerd out on it. But having an at a glance can help me go, oh, wow, here's some opportunity that I'm missing out on. This is a revenue stream that I'm seeing has some legs. And I didn't really realize it till I looked at it broken down as income, right? Or, I know I'm spending a lot of time over here and it's not making much over there, right? So it's like sometimes, and I track my time because my brain tells a story that isn't true. So sometimes what I'll do is I'll track my time and say, I spent a lot of time on this offering, this project. And then I'll look at their actual revenue and go, oh, that's actually not true, right? This is a good use of my time. And so when you can correlate instead like your beliefs and actually look at the actual data behind it, I think it can inform revenue growth too. So I love it for that. 100%. And I totally agree. If it's not your zone of genius, that's okay, because that's why we hire people who it is their zone and can work very fast and say, this is what you've got. But when you said that, I realized, and I wrote down, I was like, wait, no, we have to talk about this. What are your thoughts on nonprofits taking on debt?
Oh, that's interesting. Do you mean debt like long-term debt, like a loan, or do you mean debt like having a credit card, or like having a mortgage on a property?
Like a loan. Like say for that, say the nonprofit that's like, our big plan in the next 5 years, that's a little more vision casting, is going to require some upfront lift on, hiring or on marketing or on blah, 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 and so we don't have the funding for that right now. Could they take a loan out? What are your thoughts on that?
Mm-hmm.
They need runway.
Yeah. Yes. So I've definitely seen nonprofits take on debt for a variety of reasons. Lots during COVID, taking advantage of like the, small business government loans and things like that. I've seen organizations, open a line of credit, just like a revolving line of credit, to basically fill the gap between cost reimbursement grants. So you got to shell out a whole bunch of money up front, and then the funder is going to repay you. But you know how governments are, they take forever. And so there's a gap. And so they've taken out a line of credit to help fill that gap. And I have also seen organizations take on debt for growth and for expansion. The way I think about it is, okay, is this really what we need to do? Do we need to take on debt? Is there a way that we can actually tap into our current network, our current funders to say, hey, listen, here's our vision. Can you be part of this initial this initial push to get things off the ground. I personally would start there before taking on debt. But if that's not an option for, or if you just don't have that ability, the biggest thing I would think about is like, okay, well, if we're going to do this, what does our ability to repay look like? Because we obviously, like any kind of debt, personal or business, whatever, you don't want to get yourself into a situation where it's like, oh, we can't pay this back. And so that's where that forecasting piece and that long-term forecasting comes into play. And so if you're like, okay, well, we know that, we have a signed contract for a grant that begins in 6 months, but we need this runway for the next 6 months. Okay, well, then maybe that's, something that you can think about. But I would say knowing what that forecast looks like, revenue coming in every single month, expenses going out every single month, really having it mapped out. I'm not totally against it. But I would say for like expansion purposes, there are other things that I would probably try first before taking on debt.
Yeah, no, I think we're pretty in line. I was actually talking to a client about that. And I'm like, here's what I'd rather you do. Let's go fundraise. Let's go fundraise.
Yeah.
And I think Dan Pilato talks about this quite a bit too in his work, which is like, and sometimes if you've got a big vision, you need some big funding behind it to get the big funding. It's like, would you spend $10,000 to make 50? I'm like, yeah, I would. But a lot of organizations wouldn't. Now, a lot of organizations, it's going to be more zeros that they would even go get debt for that in Dan's example. Yeah. But I think I bring it up just because I think we're in the sector allergic to even that idea of debt, because debt, again, it's like overhead and the whole thing. So I appreciate your knowledge on that piece.
Yeah. Yeah. I'm with you. I think I would try, there are a lot of things I would try first. And like, I would certainly not take on debt to like make payroll. Like that's not what we need to do. If we don't have the money to make payroll, I think we have bigger problems that a loan is not going to solve.
Thank you for that, because that's a very black and white distinction, but also it's like, if you're thinking I'll take on debt to keep me from taking courageous action, AKA going to fundraise, that's the same piece of like, go meet with the funder, go ask the hard questions, and then go meet with another funder and go ask the hard question and go and go and go and go. And that's probably going to be a cultivation anyway, in how you get out of needing the debt to begin with. So
yeah. And I'm like, I think, maybe you just need to get in different rooms, right? Like if you're like, well, exactly. I don't know anybody that is, in the position, well, find some different people then. Like, again, there's a lot of people in this world, and one of them has to, be passionate about the work that you're doing and have money to be able to support you. And so maybe it's a matter of getting in different rooms. I love, I think we talked about Rachel Rogers, right?
Totally.
And
yep.
last time on my podcast. And, I think she has this, I think it was a podcast episode where she's like, yeah, I'm talking to like my, the people that I coach, and they're saying like, oh, I can't do this, or I can't do that, or like, I ran out of options, or I tried everything. And she's like, have you really tried everything? Like, have you really tried everything? And she, of course, the answer was always like, no, of course I haven't tried everything. And so thinking about that, like, well, have you really tried everything? Like, there's probably some more that you can do. So
yes. I gave my coaching program, I gave them a thought experiment, which was, if you had to go raise $50,000 today or this week in order to keep your 501c3 status, what would you do?
Love that.
Well, actually, I said, if you had to raise $50,000, what would you do if you had to raise it this month? And it was like, well, I don't know, And then I said, if you had to raise it to keep your status, what would you do? And they got scrappy. All of a sudden, the ideas came in, and I was like, why aren't you doing that? And it was like, yeah, all of the internal work. And I'm like, all right, I got you. But it was like, yeah, when you dial up the urgency and friction internally, suddenly you're like, all right, I'm willing to do a lot more than I'm doing right now, and telling myself I've tried everything.
I have done that so many times in my own business too. And it's like, yeah. And actually Rachel Rogers at a mastermind retreat, she had us do that kind of exercise. Like, okay, if you needed to like double or triple your revenue this quarter, what would you do?
Yep.
It's like, oh, okay. Well, that's a little different than like a 10% growth or something. It's like, if we got to double, okay, we got to think differently. Yeah. So, I love that. That's such a good prompt for your people.
Love it like breaks open your own like, no, I can't do that stuff.
Yeah.
Before we wrap up, I do like to ask every guest, what is one thought that you like to think on purpose? So this could be an affirmation, a mantra, just anything that kind of keeps you rooted in this work.
Okay, I'm obsessed with affirmations and mantras. And when I saw this, I was like, okay, I have 4 that I am constantly thinking of all the time. Okay. I love this. Okay, the first one that came to mind was everything always works out for me. So if I'm ever feeling like, oh, I don't know how I'm going to handle this, or I don't know what to, like, everything always works out for me. And I repeat that to myself, and honestly, it really helps. Another one that do you want me to share all 4? Or should I stop there?
Oh my God, we need all 4. No,
okay.
We'll take them.
Okay. The next one is trust the timing of your life. And I say that one because I am an Enneagram 3. I'm a planner. I like to think about the thing and then do the thing, but sometimes it doesn't always work out, in my timing.
Yeah.
So trust the timing of your life. Okay. Number 3. I have enough time to do everything I need to do. This one is like, right? I have enough time to do everything I need to do. And I'm looking at my calendar and I'm like, that is not what the calendar is telling me right now. And looking at my to-do list, like it is not saying the same thing. But I repeat this to myself. I have enough time to do everything I need to do. And I always do. Time is magic like that.
So
okay,
good.
my last one. So I'm a runner, and I have run a bunch of marathons, and this mantra has gotten me through like mile 18 when you're like, ooh, I still have 8 miles to run and the wheels are coming off and it's like not a good situation. So my mantra is I am healthy. I am strong. I can do this all day long. I just repeat it in my head over and over again.
Like giving yourself that beat to chant to. Oh, that's
exactly.
Good. If anyone listening is having to do any like calls, like if they're doing any sort of call-a-thon in between, it would be like that where you're like, all right, I got this, right? Of like, whether it's asking or thinking or anything that just feels like, amazing. Thank you for those. Tell everyone where they can reach out to you, connect with you, hire you, all the things.
Yes. You can find us at 100, like the number 100, 100degreesconsulting.com. If you want like a forecast template, if you're like, ooh, that sounds interesting, 100degreesconsulting.com/cash. And there's a forecasting template there. So you don't have to just start from scratch looking at an Excel screen, like, how do I create a multi-year forecast? That'd be a great place to start. And you can find me on LinkedIn or Instagram, Stephanie Skryzowski.
Anything else before we wrap up? This has been so fun. Thank you for this conversation about all of the nonprofit finances.
I know. Thank you so much for having me. No, this was fantastic. And we're totally on the same wavelength when it comes to nonprofit management and finance and leadership and all the things. Love it.
Amazing. Thanks. Hey, high achiever. I know your sights are set on ambitious, world-changing goals. In the Purpose and Profit Club group coaching program, you can get the support, motivation, and strategy to accelerate your impact. I like to say it's where the inner work meets big impact and big funding. Go to splendidcourses.com/waitlist and you will be first to be notified when we open up doors, and you'll get special bonuses when you join our waitlist. See you inside. Think you've reached out to everyone in your network? Are you out of ideas to get noticed and get funded? I hear you. That's why I'm giving you a chance to steal my prospect list. Yes, you can generate leads for your nonprofit or impact-driven business. Grab my mini training and list delivered to your inbox instantly. Go to splendidcourses.com/prospect.